Good evening to everyone. Okay, let me say good evening to everyone. My name is Zaki Baruti. I'm President General of the Universal African Peoples Organization, and tonight's webinar is being sponsored by the Gateway Green Alliance, Green Party of St. Louis, as well as the Universal African Peoples Organization. The theme of, first of all, let me just say, as Huey Newton would say, the spirit of the masses is greater than man's technology. So given the technical difficulties, we still go forward with this emergency meeting tonight, which has really been generated by the onslaught of the federal government, in particular the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with their raid on the African People's Socialist Party headquarters and individual homes. And so this is a reflection of the kind of repression that has intensified here in this country. So we have a list of great presenters this evening. And the rules for this evening is that our presenters will make a 10-minute presentation. We do have a timekeeper. At the 9-minute mark of your presentation, you will be notified that you have 1 minute left. And we'll hope that you can wrap up your comments within that 1 minute. If it, so those are the basic rules, as well as after our main presenters, we will be opening up for comments from the general public. However, we have about 4 people who will be making short comments. We're gonna be allowing people 3 minutes. And again, you'll be notified with what, this is after the main presenters have brought forth their presentation. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. Our very first presenter for this evening is Miss Madelyn Hoffman. She's a representative of the Green Party Peace Action Committee, and that end, Ms. Madelyn Hoffman.
Thank you so much, Zaki, and thank you to.
I had you muted. I'm on
I'm
the
not muted, am I?
the call.
Please mute yourself.
Yes, will everybody mute themselves when the
Are you on?
Woody, can you mute yourself? There we go.
Okay, so yes, my name is Madelyn Hoffman. I'm actually the co-chair of the Green Party U.S. Peace Action Committee and a 40-year veteran, I guess, of activism, 20 years on the environment and 20 years on working for peace. So I am honored to have been asked to speak and to be a part of this program. Thank you to all those who have organized it. And we are here to show solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party. And from what I understand, this is one part of the reason for the repression and the persecution of this organization is that supposedly the organization wasn't sufficiently anti-war or anti-Russia, excuse me, when it came to the situation in Ukraine. And I just, to start, want to say that if it could happen to this organization, to Uhuru, and it can happen to anyone. And so I was asked to speak for a short time on other ways in which the peace movement and peace activism has been repressed, suppressed, surveyed, and otherwise attempted to be kept in check. And I do want to say too that I think these are particularly dangerous times, that the level of repression and the level of the attempts to stifle dissent are as great as ever, if not greater than, in times past. So I'm going to focus on 3 areas: actual violence and intimidation, active surveillance, and trying to control the narrative. Those 3 main ways of repressing anti-war activities or social justice activities. And I'd wanted to start with the Palestinian issue. It's close to my heart in many ways. And with the election of Benjamin Netanyahu again, but this time in coalition with a far-right extremist party, the level of repression within Palestine and also outside of Palestine is at an unprecedented high. And it's pretty hard to imagine that it could get any worse than it had been for these last 70 years. But when talking about active violence, remember the Mavi Marmara in 2010, May 31st, 2010, where this was a ship that was going to try to break the blockade of the Gaza Strip. It was part of a flotilla of ships that included people from all over the world. And the IDF boarded that ship. And by the end of that afternoon, 9 civilians had been killed because they had the gall, to stand up for the human rights of Palestinians. And then, followed a series of states passing legislation that would be designed to stop people who were in favor of the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, the BDS movement against Israel. And at this current, as of 2021, 35 states had passed bills and executive orders that made it illegal to participate in a boycott, an economic boycott of Israel, the state of Israel, an economic boycott of Israel. And in that case, even New Jersey has that kind of legislation where the long arm of the law was reaching into corporate boardrooms to try to impact and affect how corporations how they'd made decisions or what decisions they made about who to conduct business with. My second example, and remember, I only have 10 minutes, so I have to be brief. Second example was what happened in May of 2019 with the people who occupied the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. This was because at that time there was an effort to install Juan Guaido, who's still in the news because somehow the United States plucked him out of thin air and said, he's the quote unquote legitimate ruler of Venezuela, and Nicolas Maduro was not. And the Venezuelan government actually asked these activists, US activists, to occupy the embassy, to protect it in Washington, D.C., to protect it against the usurper, the Juan Guaido, who was somehow selected by the US to be in that position. And even now, even in the last couple of weeks, the Venezuelans have abandoned Juan Guaido. He didn't represent anyone. He had no particular standing in this situation. And so finally, the Venezuelans themselves were even able to cut ties with him and say, he's not our leader in any way, shape, or form. And the United States continues to say, we will not abandon Juan Guaido. He is, in fact, the legitimate leader of Venezuela. But it's not just making that pronouncement about Juan Guaido. It was also how the police in Washington, D.C. handled that situation. I remember being on the phone for hours trying to call off the police because this was actually something that the Venezuelan government had asked people, the embassy protectors, to do. And after a long, twisted journey, I believe the people who were involved were finally let go or let off the hook. But it's controlling the narrative is something the media can do, has handled, unfortunately handled extremely well on behalf of the state and on behalf of the State Department and what the United States, interests are throughout the world. And then the last example I wanted to raise, and I'm certainly no expert on this, but it's something that I've heard about all my life, or all of my activist life. We are approaching Dr. King's birthday and the celebrations for Dr. King around the country. And this is active surveillance of COINTELPRO from 1956 to 1971, and how during the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement of that era, virtually anyone, any Black person who was a leader was surveyed. Dr. King, Malcolm X, organizations like CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. They were all targeted for active surveillance, which was done as all of these acts were done to intimidate people who are trying to challenge the State Department or the U.S. government's narrative, and change how the government responds, or change the policies of the government. And the level of this repression, we're coming back to something similar, and in some ways, well, it's much more out in the open these days. I want to end with just by saying, after World War II, we're all familiar with the Pastor Niemöller quote. I would think that first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And on that note, I'll pass it on to the next person. I think it is really important that all of us who care about social justice, human rights, equality, and justice, we stand by the people of Uhuru and the African People's Socialist Party.
We want to thank you for those great words of wisdom, and especially toward the end. And that's why it's very important that people recognize the repression that is coming forth from the federal government, and why we have to be in solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party. Before we call our next speaker, I need to make this quick announcement, actually, too. We're still working to try to get our speaker, Jesse Todd, on. And to be able to do that, we're asking anybody that may have the telephone codes to please call Don Fitz, and he will reach out to Jesse Todd with those codes. We can't, for whatever reason, we don't have them. And
Is that King?
yes.
I just got him.
Oh, Jesse Todd is with us. Okay,
Okay,
then.
so Jesse Todd should be joining us momentarily.
Okay, great. And the other announcement I failed to make mention, just want to thank the Green Party as well as the African People's Socialist Party for their support of our organization effort to help the people in Jackson, Mississippi. Just on December 30th, we were able to purchase 1,000 cases of water, which was our second effort. On October 6th, we purchased 1,000 cases of water for distribution in the city of Jackson, Mississippi, which is facing also environmental racism with the breakdown of their water system. But that's for another subject at another day. I just wanted to thank the supporting organizations, as I just mentioned. So moving the agenda forward, our next presenter is Kim Scipes, and he's a professor at Purdue University. Kim Scipes.
Okay, thank you, Zaki. Good evening, folks. I got asked to speak a little bit about the repression against labor historically, and that has been a long-standing battle. Those people who have tried to organize to improve their wages, their working conditions, things such as this, has been fought long and hard by the capitalists and by the people in the government that support them. So it's always good to remember some of this history. I think probably the place to start is the Great Railroad Strike in 1877. Wages on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad had been cut 3 times. There was a repression going on recession going on, and the third cut in wages mobilized workers in Martinsburg, West Virginia, to go on strike, and they stopped the transportation of the trains, especially freight trains, and that spread all over the eastern part of the country. It spread to Pittsburgh. It spread to Chicago. It eventually spread to St. Louis. And in fact, in St. Louis, from July 22nd to July 30th, 1877 was the St. Louis General Strike, where that started out in East St. Louis. Workers refused to handle freight trains, and then it spread over to the city. Eventually, that was broken not only by the local police, but with the reinforcements of the National Guard, and then finally with federal troops. So that was one we have to keep in mind. Another was the so-called Haymarket Affair in Chicago in 1886. There had been a nationwide call for workers to go out on strike on May 1st. And something like 1.5 million workers across the country went on strike, 750,000 in Chicago alone. And the strike was peaceful. And on May 4th, there was a rally at the Haymarket, which is, for those of you that know Chicago, it's just west of the Loop. And it was peaceful. The mayor came and watched. In fact, he went home. He found it kind of boring, so he went home. Well, after he left, a bunch of cops came out and started harassing people. Somebody threw what we would call a grenade at the cops. Nobody has ever determined who that was, whether it was a police informant or not, or whether it was from the workers. Nobody's ever determined. But they started rounding up people, and 8 people were put on trial. At least 2 of them were not even in the city of Chicago at the time. They were put on trial and they were convicted, and 4 of them were hung. And these became known as the Haymarket Martyrs. And Samuel Gompers of the American Federation actually contacted workers in Europe and labor organizations there and demanded or encouraged them to commemorate these martyrs, and that's why we celebrate May 1st as International Workers' Day. Interestingly, as far as I know, there's only 2 countries in the world that don't celebrate International Workers' Day on May 1st. First, you'll never believe this, but the United States doesn't. Second is Canada. But what the U.S. government did, they didn't want us to remember that day. And so they made in 1884 under President Grover Cleveland, they made, I'm sorry, not 1884, that'd be 1894, I think, made the first Monday in September as Labor Day. So going along with what Madelyn just said about controlling the narrative, they don't want us to think about international solidarity. And in fact, to this day, there is a monument in Chicago. It's not the most realistic one. It basically commemorates a trailer being blown up, and this is sort of the attack on free speech. But it had to be vetted by the Chicago Police Department. They wouldn't let more realistic things come up. But even today, as you go through Chicago, there are no signs to the Haymarket. They don't want us to remember that. Yet there are workers that come from around the world and have brought plaques such as in Arabic and Tagalog and Spanish. So workers from around the world have made their way to Chicago and honored those people, while the city of Chicago to this day still doesn't do it, and they don't do it in the schools or anything else. Another example of repression was around the Seattle General Strike in 1919. Workers went on strike. Some of them were activists and had been fighting for better wages and working conditions. Some were supporters of the Bolshevik Revolution, which had just happened a couple of years before. But they went on strike and controlled the city for about 5 days, and then the mayor mobilized the National Guard and the feds to bring in the troops. They didn't use them, but the workers, the labor leaders, decided they weren't in a position to fight, even should they want to, and they backed down. Then things changed in 1934. In 1934, during the Depression, there were three crucial general strikes. There was the West Coast Maritime Strike that was led, workers up and down the West Coast, the Pacific Coast, went on strike. This was led by members of the IWW and the Communist Party. They shut down San Francisco for a week. Nothing moved. They had a strike committee that ran the whole thing. Similarly, that year, you also had the Minneapolis truckers strike. Again, a general strike, this time led by Trotskyist organizations. And then in Toledo, Ohio, you had the Autolite strike that was led by A.J. Musty and his people, the so-called Mustyites. One of the things that came out of this was that the federal government realized that direct repression just wasn't working. And so in 1935, they passed the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, and basically said striking was okay, but you had to follow certain rules and to get the support of the federal government. Now, the interesting thing about that was because of the emergence of particularly the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, is that the federal government recognized that workers had to have a way to sort of, if you will, let off steam. So in general, there was not a lot of subsequent repression after that until we get to 1981, and that was the PATCO, or Air Traffic Controller Strike. People had been fighting to improve the air traffic control system of the United States. This is what controls and keeps us safe when we fly over this country. And people were trying to get new equipment and better working conditions for workers and things like that. Ronald Reagan told the air traffic controllers that he supported them while he was a candidate. He got elected, as we know, and then he turned on them. And that when they went out on strike, Reagan brought in the military to break the strike. What he did was he brought in the military, such as the Marine Corps and the Air Force, the Navy. They all have their air wings, and they have air traffic controllers. And Reagan brought those in to break the strike. So thousands of people lost their jobs, and many of them were never let back into employment as air traffic controllers. So
1 minute.
Thank you. So anyway, what we have to understand is, I think it's more than just labor. I think we have to understand people are organizing on different ways. They're organizing around issues of race and ethnicity. They're organizing around gender. They're organizing sexual sexual ability, control their sexuality, things like this, and that there's going to be efforts to repress us. And I think we have to understand that that's going to happen. It's going to be more subtle than shooting us down, I think, at least for a while. We haven't threatened them that much, but we need to prepare for this. We need to organize and to prepare to do this, and we need to support each other. And I would remind people that a few years ago, I forget when, it's about 2017 or 18, there was an attack in Chicago on the Freedom Road Socialist Party. Now, I'm not a member of that. But we recognize the importance of that, and because Freedom Road stood strong, they overcame that repression. So that's an example that perhaps the African People's Socialist Party may want to check out and try to understand how that was successful. Thank you all very much, and I appreciate this program. Thank you.
And we want to thank you, Kim, for providing those historical examples of the government trying to repress, activities of the labor movement. Moving forward, our next presenter is Don Fitz, and he's with the Green Party of St. Louis. Don Fitz.
Thank you, Zaki. I want to talk about the Democratic Party, which a lot of people have the illusion is not as oppressive as the Republican Party. Let's remember that the U.S. War for Independence was fought over whether Great Britain or the colonies were going to have the right to exploit slave labor. And it wasn't just Black people. Remember that Andrew Jackson, the 7th president, was infamous for slaughtering indigenous people with a high intensity. Even Republicans such as Abe Lincoln firmly believed in white supremacy. And after the Civil War, the Democrats, and which became the Dixiecrats, designed and implemented the destruction of Reconstruction, drove Black people out of elected positions, instituted Jim Crow laws, and deprived Black people of the vote. The ultimate Dixiecrat, I think, was Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is generally not taught in school as one of the most extreme racists in U.S. history, but this Democrat definitely was. Many parts of the federal government had been desegregated, but Woodrow Wilson resegregated them. W.B. Du Bois wrote that, quote, one of the colored clerk who could not be segregated due to the nature of his work consequently had a cage built around him to separate him from the whites. One of the things that Woodrow Wilson wrote was, there's no government positions for Negroes. A Negro's place is in the cornfield. In 1914, the year after he took office, Woodrow Wilson began demanding photographs of everybody who applied for a federal job so he could weed out Black people. And the thing which he may be most infamous for is that during his reign, the KKK, before his reign, the KKK was on the decline. But Woodrow Wilson had a film showing of The Birth of the Nation, which was a profoundly racist film, which inspired the regrowth of the KKK and lynchings throughout the 1920s. Woodrow Wilson is also infamous, which I think we should all be aware of, winning re-election with the slogan, he kept us out of war, and sort of like Joe Biden, who portrayed the Republicans as warmonger, he took the US right into World War I and was responsible for arresting Eugene Debs, the head of the Socialist Party at the time. And Debs stayed in jail until the Republican Warren Harding let him out. But it got worse over time. The Democrat FDR set up concentration camps for Japanese, and the New Deal had profoundly racist content all the way through it. And those of us from Missouri should not forget Harry Truman, who used nuclear bombs on Japan 2 times to slaughter hundreds of thousands of people at a time that he knew very well that Japan wanted to surrender. But he wanted to bomb them, to test 2 different types of bombs. John Kennedy initiated the campaign against Cuba, which goes on through today. And keep in mind that Cuba has the largest Black population outside of Haiti in this hemisphere, and American racists could not tolerate the idea of a largely Black nation being revolutionary. LBJ was responsible for vastly expanding the racist war against Vietnam. Barack Obama was responsible for destroying the concept of Medicare for all, perhaps what is most desperately needed today for Black and brown people as well as poor white people. The Democrats have worked since 2000 to intensely destroy the Green Party. And in the 19th century, there are many small parties throughout the US which were fundamentally important in changing policies of the US by putting their ideas into the large parties. But the Democrats have kept Green parties off the ballot, have had lawsuits to remove their names from petitions to get the Green Party, where they signed for the Green Party. And in Missouri, the League for Women Voters, probably working with the Democrats, refused to put the Green Party candidates on the 2016 voters guide, and radio websites here listed only the corporate parties. But the main person I want to talk about is Joe Biden, who I hope I don't offend anybody's religion when I say that Joe Biden, in my opinion, was Woodrow Wilson reincarnated. Joe Biden has done incredible damage. If you remember, when Trump was president, he tried to organize an anti-China hate campaign by calling COVID-19 the China virus. He wasn't able to pull it off, but Joe Biden was vastly more successful in having a hate campaign against Russia. And it was incredible, with the war in Ukraine starting, that he was able to mobilize virtually all of the press to do everything they could to get people to hate Russia and kill Russians. Then he turned to China after that was successful, and he pulled off what Trump could not do by sending Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan to unnecessarily antagonize Taiwan to the maximum possibility. You might not know of the war against Yemen, but you should read about it if you haven't, because there's been at least 377,000 people killed in that war. Biden said he wants to end the war, but he continues to send bombs to Saudi Arabia to continue the attacks. Also, you remember, if you're as old as I am, that Richard Nixon had his Chile, where he sent the CIA into Chile to help overthrow the government. And Joe Biden has done similar things in Peru, where there was a coup on December the 7th. The Trump administration nominated CIA agent Lisa Kenna to be the ambassador to Peru. When Joe Biden came in, he had saw no reason to change the Trump policies and kept Lisa Kenna in. And the night before the coup, Kenna had a meeting with the defense minister of Peru and probably helped to design the overthrow of the elected Peruvian government. For labor, for some reason, labor continues to support Biden no matter what he does. The latest example that you might remember from last fall was when the railroad workers needed to have a contract and threatened to strike, and Biden rammed something down their throat, which basically said there would be no sick leave, no sick days off for railroad workers. Now, and he said, don't worry, because I'm going to help get railroad workers time off for sick leave. Now, have you heard of anything in the last 30 days of Joe Biden lifting even a finger to guarantee sick leave for railroad workers? In terms of health, the Republicans are infamous for trying to destroy Medicare for all, preventing from happening. But what Biden is doing is undermining Medicare piece by piece by going along with the privatization. He's basically doing the same thing with Veterans Administration. The Republicans say that they would like to destroy it outright. Joe Biden seems to be more, the Democrats are always more soft-spoken and just, let it, want to privatize it piece by piece. Joe Biden, some people think that Joe Biden is more friendly to the environment than Donald Trump is. Wrong again. The U.S. is becoming the world's leader in liquefied natural gas because the Ukraine war makes it extremely profitable. Western Europe pays 4 times as much for natural gas from the US as it would for natural gas from Russia, with American corporations making enormous progress. Now, in terms of the racism of Joe Biden, it really couldn't be more extreme. Look at the way that when Russia attacked Ukraine, you saw things on TV day after day after day about how horrible it was that Ukrainians were being slaughtered, which of course it was bad, for the deaths on both sides. But then you compare that to what's happening at the border, where we're told almost nightly on the news that we need to protect our borders, seal off our borders, of course, not from white people from Ukraine, but from Hispanic descendants, from Mexico and other Latin American countries. They've reported 207 deaths at the hand of ICE, the federal government agency. And the Trump and Biden administrations together have expelled over 1.5 million people from the U.S. and don't even let them request asylum. And this is Joe Biden's racist legacy is very, very long. I want to end up by reading one quotation, which is, I didn't write this, a man named Christopher Orlet wrote it. And that is that Biden could lower prescription drug costs by seizing patents and offering them to other manufacturers who produce them more cheaply. He could cancel student debt. He could officially end the war on drugs. He can designate new national monuments which would help threatened species. He could ban fossil fuel drilling and mining on federal lands. Instead, mining approvals are up. He could close Guantanamo and bring home more than 1 million troops stationed abroad. All of these are things that Biden does not need congressional approval to do, and he doesn't do any of them. But he does do some things on its own, and that is Joe Biden gets the FBI and the Department of Justice to attack Amala Yeshitela and supporters.
1 minute.
And supporters from the African People's Socialist Party. And what I often say about the Democratic and Republican parties is that the Republican parties looks like they're going after the working class and people of color with a butcher knife, screaming that they want to do it, they want to deprive people of rights and attack them. But while the Republicans use a butcher knife, the Democrats are vastly more sophisticated and use a stiletto to claim that they support people, then knife them in the back and gently wipe the blood off the stiletto. The difference in the Democrats and Republicans is not the essence of what they do, it's in the politeness of how they do it and how the Democrats are more successful at covering up their crimes.
Time's out.
Okay, then, Don, really appreciate your remarks, and you were right on time. Malcolm X would say, in terms of both political parties, one is a wolf and one is a fox. They both eat you. So, as well as you made mention about Biden has continued the policy of repression toward Cuba. You're right on. As well as just want to remind people, it was under the Obama administration with Biden as his vice president that did the greatest crime against Africa, as I see it, and that was with the murder and assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. So with that said, moving forward, we now have our next presenter, Jesse Todd. But Jesse, just so that we had announced the basic rules for this evening. Every presenter is to make a presentation of 10 minutes. At your 9-minute point, our timekeeper will let you know just 1 minute left, and so act accordingly or speak accordingly, shall I say. Jesse Todd is the 18th Ward alderperson in the city of St. Louis, a very outspoken brother over the years, and we appreciate his work as alderman and even prior to that, just as an activist. Jesse Todd. Jesse? Is Jesse on? Jesse Todd going once. Jesse Todd. Don, I see you trying to say something. I know you.
Yeah, Jesse Todd is, Jesse, he's muted. Joe, are you able to unmute phone number 314-277-4053? It's the last phone number I have in my list. And since he's
I cannot unmute phones. I can simply send them a message to unmute.
how can a phone unmute? Oh, whoa, I think we got him.
Okay, Jesse, are you with us? As we're waiting on Jesse, also just a quick reminder, we want to thank the number of participants, and there's some great information and comments in the chat. Appreciate those folks who are making their various comments. And I see from Jesse, he says, if you hit Todd, what was that? Hit *6, I think.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Jesse.
Okay, thank you, Baruti. First of all, I would like to thank you in the audience. And first, let me say this. The African experience has been, in most cases, different than the experience, I would use the word of North Americans. I would just use that, and Europeans. From the very beginning, as everybody already probably know, that ever since Europe attacked Africa more than 600 years ago, that experience was where families, culture, resources, and everything else was taken, including people. Then the slaveholding jails, getting to the resistance of the fighters in Africa, the killing and breaking up of families, and then the traveling and deaths the deaths and the jails that they placed the Africans in, as well as the deaths on the ships where there were so many deaths that, and people thrown in the water. The sharks were known to have, were said to have traveled with the ships because they knew there would be bodies to eat on the. So what we got here, after 250 years, a new environment also took the lives of many African people. But what we got here, as everybody knows, for 250 years, we were considered property, and we cleared the land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean without getting any reparations of the $14 trillion they owe, that the United States government owes, and that white people in general benefited from. We need that, as well as the pain and suffering and the destruction that not only did it cause then, the 250 years and the trip over here and the resistance that we fought, but the suffering that we are suffering at this particular time, the pain and suffering. So I would just start with the leading up to the Civil War in 1850. There was a severe repression of Africans. It was called the fugitive slave law, where if at first you could escape north, and then you would be free. But then after the slavery movement got right after the Nat Turner Rebellion, there continued to be much more repression. And then in 1850, the slave law was passed, and so they started. Many Africans were escaping to Canada because they were not picking up people who were both escaping as well as regular citizens and putting them back into slavery. Then the repressive ruling of Dred Scott, where Judge Roger Taney, who was the Supreme Court Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, ruled that Africans were property, and that people that you couldn't take property without that the owner had a right to his property, and in addition, blacks had no right to that the white man had to respect, whether they were slaves or not, and that was really repressive. And then right after the Civil War, we had the black codes, where if a person, for example, was looking for a job, they could be picked up and placed back into slavery because they said they didn't have a job. Of course, you wouldn't have a job if you were looking for a job, but they could. It was the black code also limited where you could go. It was before the actual ruling that I would talk about later, that made it totally legal for segregation. But this was one way. The Black Code was to reduce the mobility as well as the job opportunities and the use of tax-paid facilities, whether they were libraries, schools, wherever the repressive owners, not just the owners in the South, it was a political decision because of the fact that people, they made the rule, whereas if your grandfather or father voted, you could vote. Well, if people were slaves, of course their grandfathers and fathers couldn't vote. So that's how these codes were put in, and they took advantage of these codes. And so they started making those rules about voting. Then in the North, they also had repression in that they had restrictive covenants. In fact, in St. Louis, on Lewis Place, that's where the restrictive covenants. So as the intensity of the repression was different in different parts of the country, but it was severely, it was different. And in many cases, Blacks were also restricted from unions, but we have to keep in mind that where most Blacks were before World War I was actually being repressed in the rural areas, because we came to the northern areas during World War II. So that's where the severe repression was, and that's why Africans left the South, because of terrorism and also for better opportunities in the North. So what happened too was then in 1883, we had the Civil Rights Act was about Congress was passed to segregate Africans even more. And then in 1896 we had what was called Pleasant versus Ferguson. That's when we stayed under repression and segregation until 1954, and then in 1890, and then in 1400s, after the Civil War, African soldiers were hung in uniform. So, and then in the 60s, the Panthers, and then there was assassination from whether it was Meg Evers King, Panthers, more than 30 Panthers were assassinated. And so the repression was ongoing in the African community, and it also continues today with the attack on the African People's Socialist Party. So what we have to do, all freedom-loving people, we must fight together, because whether it be the labor movement, whether it be the progressive people, or the communist socialists, or predominantly white organizations, whoever, they did it in the past to different organizations, and what they're doing to the African People's Socialist Party now, they will be doing it in the future to anyone that challenges this status quo. So if we stop it now with the African People's Socialist Party, we can stop it from happening to other groups. Because what is happening is that right now with the African People's Socialist Party, we're not violating laws. They say we have a peaceful right to peacefully assemble, right to freedom of speech, association, and we have equal protection under the law, which the 14th Amendment gives us. The government is breaking the law when they just attack the African People's Socialist Party for actually running an election, which is what this country is supposed to be about. It says it's the land of the free and the home of the brave with running elections. I think this country is just mad because it's angry, because it's kind of like a parent who, when you go out and tell them how bad they're treating you, they want to look good in public, and then use the special repression against Africans that they've used all the time. And so this is just an example of the continuation of the repression that has gone down. And then in the 60s, as I said, it was the anti-war people also, there was repression, as well as the at Kent State, there were 4 students shot. So, I mean, there is, one is one too many. So there was also infiltration and disruption into various anti-war movement groups that actually exposed COINTELPRO. But the COINTELPRO again started with the Communist Party. That's where it started, and then it expanded. Okay, 1 minute. Okay, and then the COINTELPRO dovetailed right. It got Rosenberg and the Rosenbergs murdered. Then it dovetailed right out into the 60s. And so that's an example of how McCarthy, you had this McCarthy in the 1950s that fired more, called them communists and fired more than 700 workers. And so if we had to stop that before he did that, maybe we could have stopped. A good example, we could have stopped the COINTELPRO if we had been able to stop that. So whenever we see repression, injustice anywhere, as Dr. King said, is a threat to justice everywhere. Again, what they're doing to the African People's Socialist Party today, as they would be doing tomorrow, what they are doing to us. So the point is, and also as Malcolm said, he was even saying that if it wasn't for Malcolm and speaking out so strongly, they probably would have been marching the NAACP up and other people up for doing un-American activities, but the Black Power movement scared them so bad that they just wanted to get rid of the Panthers and all the rest of us who were in the Black Power movement. And so that's helped to save a lot of, whether it be the socialist, communist, NAACP types, and other civil rights and socialist and revolutionary type groups too. So it is to the advantage.
Finish.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. Appreciate you inviting me on.
All right, Jesse, we want to thank you for your overall view of the repression of Black people here in this country. Also, I just want to reemphasize some of that repression also included that period of Jim Crow, where Black people were constantly being lynched in this country. And as one of our chat people had made mention, the repression goes forward as it relates to the mass incarceration of Black people, and that the United States is the country with the largest jail population in the world. So moving forward again, our next speaker, and before I present the next speaker, I felt to mention Jesse Todd stood with the African People's Socialist Party on the day that the raid took place at Omali Yesateli's residence. He stood strong in solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party. Our next speaker is a brother who I met at the height of the Mike Brown rebellion. And I have the greatest respect for him, for his years of service for our people, to bring about substantive change in our community. And as an activist, I was very outraged, like many of you. And I just want to make a point that back in 1969, with the attack of the FBI on the residence and the homes of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark and their subsequent assassination, as a young man at that time, that outraged me to no end, just as the raid just occurred this past year on July 29th, that the FBI carried out on the home of Omali Yesateli. In fact, it had outraged me to such a level that was my first serious organizing in the community in East St. Louis, which I resided at that time, where we organized a massive demonstration. And I began to work with the Panther Party as an extension of that. So there's different turning points in history to which we must stand in solidarity to the righteous forces that's trying to bring about change and upliftment for the masses of our people. And on the side of history is Brother Omali Yesateli, who has dedicated all of his life for the upliftment of us as a people. And he's currently the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, as well as chairman of the Black is Back Coalition. On that note, Omali Yesateli. You need to unmute, I guess, Omali. Okay.
First of all, let me express my appreciation to Comrade Zaki Baruti for that introduction, and for not just that introduction, and not just for standing with us on July 29th after the raid, this military assault on my home and the offices and homes of other members of our party and movement in 2 states. But since 2014, when Mike Brown was murdered, it was Zaki who opened the door and for us to come to St. Louis and participate in doing the work that we're doing now. And that I might suggest that Zaki probably played a role in the FBI attacking us, because the work we're doing here, I think, is one of the reasons that we got attacked. I also want to express appreciation to Don Fitz and the Missouri Green Party. And it's just been a tremendous kind of solidarity that you've demonstrated since this has happened. And I can say, frankly, that it has made a difference in the level of support that we've seen coming from a number of sources because of the stance that you've taken up to now. So I want to thank you very much and thank everybody who is participating in this discussion. And then there's not enough that I can say about Comrade Jesse Todd, who I first saw engaged in fierce battle at the Board of Alderpersons, struggling against this ongoing process to make St. Louis majority white, that included the reduction in the number of wards and a host of other things that were happening at the time. And so Jess has just been an extraordinary force, and one of the 2 elected officials that I can identify right now at this time in history that I have confidence and faith in, and a much appreciation. I want to thank everybody for being here. And I think this is a real important discussion that we are engaged in when we talk about the long road of US repression. And I'm trying to organize this presentation so that I can do something within the 10 minutes that's been allotted. First of all, I think it is important for those who may not know what happened on July 29th for me just to say something briefly about that. On July 29th at 5 o'clock in the morning here, Central Time, my wife and I were at the dining room table preparing to come to the Uhuru House here in St. Louis, where we were conducting training for doulas. I think there were 14 or 16 African women who came to be trained as doulas here, which is a critical question, not only in St. Louis, but generally in the African world, but specifically here in St. Louis, where enough African babies die in the first year of life to fill 14 kindergarten classrooms. And that's on an annual basis. So we were training doulas, and that was to occur that morning. And I was actually preparing, getting ready to go to the gym. So we were sitting down talking about the day. And then at 5 o'clock, and out of the night, this loud voice came over a loudspeaker, demanding that the people in the residence come out with our hands up and nothing in our hands. And then flashbang grenades started going off all over everywhere. It was startling, to say the least. And I asked my wife, Onazine Shatella, who leads all of our economic development projects, to stay. I asked her to let me go down first, and then that she would call everybody and let them know that we were under attack. And she tried, but couldn't, because they had jammed our phones. And there's just the idea that the phone companies cooperated with them in this attack on us, as well as the St. Louis Police Department. And I went downstairs, and when I got downstairs, I was greeted by scores of military-clad forces carrying assault weapons, and with assault weapons mounted with laser sights that were bouncing off my chest. They were making it very clear that they were prepared to kill me. It was a terroristic threat. My wife, when she came out of the door, was almost hit in the face with a drone that they had sent up to the stairs into our house. In the back of our house, at the same time, flashbang grenades are going off all over the place. In the back of my house, we were to see that they had set off these flashbang grenades that had damaged their stairwell. They had come through the back door. They had knocked out windows. They had crashed in the door. At the same time, they were doing this in North St. Louis. They were in South St. Louis at our Solidarity Center in Gravois. And there they used battering rams, knocked down the door. They used flashbang grenades. They put tapes over the video security system so nobody could see what they were doing. And they crashed in. And when they went in, they also, as they had at my home, they took cell phones and they took electronic devices. They took iPads and they took computers, etc. They damaged the building severely. They knocked down steel doors. And then they similarly, at the home of two of the comrades in the Solidarity Movement, Penny Hess, who they characterized as a non-indicted co-conspirator, and Kitty Riley. They went to their homes and they used battering rams, knocked their doors in, and then held them at gunpoint and took their cell phones and other kinds of devices. Similarly, in St. Petersburg, Florida, I'm hoping that some of you will go to handsoffahooter.org so you can see some of the videos that came from this. In St. Petersburg, Florida, they went to the Hooter house there. And there were at least 50 of them. And these are military forces. They call them FBI, but they were military, hardcore military forces. And they knocked the doors in. They took our radio station temporarily off the air. They went into our archives with more than 50 years of archived material of our struggle, not only of our party, but of our movement and struggles around the world. They took some of that. We're still trying to calibrate and see what exactly was taken. They took cell phones again. They went to the home of a young woman, Akilia Nai. Some of you may have known her, met her, know of her. She's the person we ran for city government in St. Petersburg, Florida. They went to her home. The St. Petersburg Police Department knocked on the door, told her that someone was breaking into her car and she should come out and investigate. And when she came out there, she was surrounded by FBI agents who came from behind vehicles and things like that. They took her cell phone as well. They went to my home in St. Petersburg, where I live, grew up in St. Petersburg. They went to my home there, though we are not there because we've moved to St. Louis, and they broke into that house and they stole all kinds of materials from that house. They shut the neighborhood down so that people who live in that community who were trying to come home in the morning, they couldn't get there, and people who were trying to leave, going someplace to work, etc., they had to show identification before they can even move in that community. So that's the intensity of this assault that they made. When we're asking them, what is this about? Why are you attacking us? They said that they told me, they zip tied my hands behind my back, they handcuffed my wife, hands behind her back. And they said that the reason that they were doing this because later that day there was going to be an indictment of a Russian national, and that my name was involved in this, and that they were serving what they call search warrants. And so they used flashbang grenades, battering rams, breaking windows, knocking down doors and things like that, they said, to serve search warrants. So we were to learn that we are now accused. Right now, there's an allegation about 4 of us, but the indictment is wide open, in that it includes the entire movement, literally the entire Uhuru movement, African People's Socialist Party, and it also names several people who they did not characterize as non-indicted co-conspirators up to now. And that we are accused of having violated the Foreign Agent Registration Act because the work that we did, I went to Moscow, and they said I went to Moscow, and I went to Moscow at the invitation of a non-governmental organization. And they said that organization paid my way there, so that's evidence of me being employed by Russia. They implied that they have some kind of intelligence, they're penetrating the Russian security entity in Russia. and that they learned that these discussions were happening with the person and organization that invited us there and the heads of Russian security that showed how they were using us, and which you know, even if that were true, it seems to me that they had a responsibility to come say, knock on the door and say, hey, you know, the Russian intelligence are using you. So why didn't they do that? They didn't do anything like that. It's a lie. Everything they've said is bogus. It's a lie. We've never taken a penny from the Russian government. They said the Russian government paid us because we did a 4-city tour during a time where the United Nations was traveling throughout the United States, investigating the situation of Black people. We did a 4-city tour, an encampment, a winter encampment, going with them, and a part of that was a process to gain signatures on a petition charging the United States with violation of the United Nations Convention on the crime of punishment of genocide, prevention and punishment of genocide. We had collected, by the way, collected 130,000 signatures, and they stole them. They took them off change.org. They've disappeared. Those and of course 130,000 people obviously were not working for the Russians. There's
1 minute.
Wow, that was pretty quick. So anyway, I just want to say that Martin Luther King, who has been sanitized to meet the requirements of this system and the Joe Bidens of the world, and the Democrats and the Republican parties and all of them, is somebody who existed during a time of great turbulence in this world and in this country, just as we are now. And that our party, he was killed as a part of the process of us destroying a revolutionary anti-colonial movement that was global. They killed Lumumba, they overthrew Nkrumah, they were killed Sobukwe, they were killing people and destroying movements. They killed in 1966, I think it was, 1 million communists in Indonesia alone. They were, and the CIA was highly involved in that. They were harassed Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, who they tried to force to commit suicide. The 1966, you got to remember, during the same time frame where King was killed, which was killed in 1968, Malcolm killed in 1965, Fred Hampton, Black Panther Party, killed in 1969. In 1966, masses of people from around the world came to Havana, Cuba, for a Tricontinental Conference to condemn colonialism and to organize to destroy colonialism. It was this war against colonialism that which is the foundation. Karl Marx said that, and I believe this by Marx. He says that what he called wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. And he defined this wage slavery as turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of Black skins. And the truth of the matter is, when we talk about the long road of US repression, African people came to this country under the gun. We were not people who came here looking for a better way of life. We came here lost a better way of life, and our struggle has been, our struggle has been since that time. So this notion that it took a Russian to tell us that we were oppressed is extraordinary. And so this is what is so important. 1960s, they did this brutal assassinations and murder. And the thing is that we didn't know what was happening in the 1960s. We have the advantage in 2023 of knowing what's happening. That's why this meeting is important. That's why it's possible for you to be involved in this discussion. So it won't be like when Malcolm X was killed, there was no uproar coming from the white community. When Martin Luther King was killed, it was mostly—
Need to wrap up.
Now you have this opportunity and you to participate in pushing it back. So thank you very much. Uhuru.
Thank you, Brother Omali Yesateli. And that's firsthand in terms of terrorism being visited upon you, your family, and the movement. And that's why it's important that we have this emergency meeting. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Moving the program forward, we're now going to open it up for 3 minutes to 4 individuals, and then we'll take questions and comments after they make their short presentation. And the presentation for the next 4 people will be for 3 minutes. Mind you, 3 minutes. The first person to make a presentation under those rules is Miss Chris Mann of the Kansas City Green Party, who will be making an announcement about the next webinar. Chris Mann.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Chairman, for recounting the events of that day. I do urge everybody to look at the videos. My job is to announce the next webinar, which is on February 1st, which is a Wednesday evening, 7:30, same time as this evening's. The title of the webinar is U.S. Violence. Where does it originate? It's more than gun violence. The webinar will cover multiple aspects of violence, including United States gun violence. It has become unbearable. The claims, really what dictates how federal, state, and local governments enact gun safety is the Second Amendment. A culture of death permeates Missouri's history of racial terror lynchings, and the modern day application of that is the application of the death penalty. The webinar will also cover a model municipal program in Ward 22 of St. Louis, which encourages communities to police themselves and reduce violence by training participants how to use de-escalation tactics and reduce violence when intervening in confrontations. And the colonial mode of production forms a violent parasitic relationship between Europeans and African people and other oppressed masses. This is particularly true for resource extraction from colonized humanity. So our speakers will be Frank Lawrence from the Missouri Green Party, Kansas City, Elise Max, also from the Green Party, Kansas City, but she is also the co-chair of Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Lisa Legron is from Organization for Black Struggle.
1 minute.
Moise Odom is from African People's Socialist Party. The webinar will be chaired by Jamu Baraka. He will be the moderator. He's from Black Alliance for Peace, and he was the Green Party's candidate for Vice President of the United States in 2016. I'm hoping everyone will come. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the speakers tonight.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for that announcement. Also, just as a reminder on the chat, for those who are interested in signing the petition in support of the Uhuru movement, there's a petition out there, as well as for those, they will have to, the African People's Socialist Party will be incurring some legal debt to fight their case. So there's a way of giving. So I believe that's also in the chat. Moving forward, our next presenter, again for 3 minutes, is Jesse Nevels. He's with the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Jesse Nevels, another person who was victimized by the terrorist organization, the FBI. Jesse Nevels.
Uhuru, thank you very much to Zaki Baruti and to everyone. And I will be speaking specifically on how people can contribute and donate to the Legal Defense Fund for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign. First of all, I want to salute the powerful presentation from Chairman Omale Shatella. And I, as a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, work under the leadership of Chairman Omale and the African People's Socialist Party with the task of organizing in the white community for reparations to African people. I want to thank the Green Party, Don Fitz, Angelica, Jesse Todd, and everyone who spoke. And also I have the honor to be on the fundraising committee for the Hands Off Uhuru campaign under the leadership of Moise Odom. The Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign was launched by the Uhuru movement right after, in the immediate aftermath of the July 29th raids that Chairman Omali Yeshitela just described, to defend the democratic rights of African people to organize for their liberation from US government repression and to push them back. And we are confident that the US government can be pushed back from its current posture of threats of indictment, arrest, and imprisonment of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and leaders of the Uhuru movement. They can be stopped, they can be beaten, but only with the participation of the people. And one important way that everybody can contribute is by going to handsoffuhuru.org/donate and contributing whatever you can towards the legal fees that will be needed to retain lawyers. Many people have donated already and made it possible to retain lawyers for pre-indictment representation. But once indictments happen, a lot of money, at least $277,500 will be needed for legal fees to retain counsel, to go to trial, to do as Chairman Omali Yeshitela has said, and put them on trial, put the FBI on trial, put the government on trial for their crimes against the African liberation movement and African and oppressed peoples as a whole. At this juncture, thanks to the support of many hundreds of people, we have raised $126,500. So another $151,000 is needed. And you can donate again by going to handsoffahuru.org/donate. You are contributing to the Open Collective Foundation, which is the fiscal sponsor for Hands Off Uhuru. So it's a 501c3 nonprofit. It is tax deductible. And you can also send a check. I'll put this in the chat to Open Collective Foundation at 340 South Levin Ave in Walnut, California, and make it out to Open Collective Foundation. In the memo, put Hands Off Uhuru. You can also hold a fundraiser, make a pledge to raise $100, $500, $1,000 or more, hold a house event, a webinar, a party, or some other kind of activity to build support for this historic campaign. This will be won in the courts, but it will be won there because it will be won in the streets. And that is why this event tonight was so important. And I, again, just want to salute the profound leadership and courageous stance of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, and encourage everybody who can to go to handsoffahuru.org/donate and contribute towards what will surely be a landmark victory that will usher in a new chapter in the history of the anti-colonial struggle and make waves all around the world. We can push them back. You can be a part of it. handsoffahuru.org/donate. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Jesse, and just want to encourage everybody, donate, donate, donate. As well as a thought just came in my mind, this case involving the Uhuru movement that as Omali Yeshitela had earlier mentioned, that we brought him here to the state of Missouri, the landmark case of the Dred Scott case. This is similar. This is a historic case that all across this country and across the world, people would be focusing in on. Our next presenter would be Bob Sabira, and he would be dealing with the atrocities of the Zionist state of Israel. Bob Sabira.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I want to thank Don for organizing this. Omali, your talk was brilliant. I could listen to you all night, and thank you, Jesse, for your efforts. I have a little slide presentation, but I'm not sure how appropriate it is. It shows some home demolitions from this morning in Palestine. When I watched what happened on the news to Omali and the Uhuru movement, I was shocked. And one of the comparisons that I couldn't help making was to the Holy Land 5 Foundation. I'm involved, I'm a descendant of, my parents grew up in Palestine. I'm Jewish, but they immigrated out of Israel before the state of Israel was established. But the Holy Land Foundation, the same thing happened to them. 5 people were imprisoned, and 2 of them are still in prison. They were serving 65-year terms, and two of them are still serving those terms. The Holy Land Foundation supported schools. They supported healthcare for Palestinian refugees. They also were the first people on the scene. They were as first responders in Oklahoma City. They did a lot of work in the United States. They did a lot of work for people that were suffering. And because of their support for Palestinian refugees, they were attacked by the federal government viciously. There's a great book. I'm going to put something here in the chat for anyone who's curious about it. But not to divert you, but we really have to make common cause with the similar techniques. You know, American police and Israeli police train together. I have a friend in high school that does that, and they use the same tactics of flashbang grenades, which I've seen personally. And you know, they're bringing the armed forces in because the police are now militarized into social society. Another thing that happened recently, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, Ken Roth, who served for 20 years on Human Rights Watch, was rejected for a fellowship with the Kennedy School because of his support for Palestinians and speaking out for Palestinian injustice. And this is also an issue that's happening today. Incidentally, the Holy Land 5, if you're interested in finding out about it, Miko Pellet wrote a fabulous book describing in detail what happened, what the accusations were, and covering the trial itself. I really think that this is something that white people, Black people, Americans, working people have to identify with, because, you know, it threatens civil society. I'll show you very briefly what happened this morning. I don't think I'm sharing the screen. There we go. This happened this morning. This is a beautiful home. This is after it was destroyed. This is a private family that lived here. This is it being destroyed. This happens every day. You know, we just have to join hands and make a movement for this cause. That's really all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bob, for that presentation. As you see, the Zionists and the U.S. imperialism is nonstop until we as a people rise up to put an end to what is taking place against the masses of the people. Our last presenter for 3 minutes is Miss Penny Hess of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Penny.
Uhuru, and salute to Zaki Baruti. Appreciate this event. Salute to the Green Party and all the great speakers. As always, I begin by recognizing my leadership, Chairman Omali Shatella. I salute his profound presentation and his giving us the theory of African internationalism, which gives us the science to understand that the colonial question is the key question and contradiction in the world today. I have the honor of being the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, organizing for reparations to the African community in the white community. I am one of the 4 unindicted co-conspirators, and I'm proud to be so. we are clear that the target of these attacks was Chairman Omali Yeshitela, also the Deputy Chair Onizine Yeshitela, the African People's Socialist Party, the Black Power Blueprint, the Uhuru Movement, and that they tried to assassinate Chairman Omali Yeshitela on July 29th, and they made it very clear that they had the ability and power to do that. The house that I share with APSC comrade Kitty Riley on the south side of St. Louis in the white community was also raided at 5 a.m. on July 29th by carloads of assault rifle toting FBI agents in armored vehicles. They broke down our door with a high-powered battering ram and kept us at gunpoint for at least 6 hours while they went through the whole house, taking files, all electronics, etc. The Uhuru Solidarity Center at 2654 Gravois, which has the banner Unity Through Reparations, and the home of Comrade Jesse and Amanda were also raided. For the first time in history, the anti-colonial African Revolution created an organization and a way for white people, the colonizers, to be part of its strategy and defense, to be able to take some of the heat off the colonial attacks on the African Revolution, because they don't do to the white community what they do to African people. And now we as white people can not only give support to the African Revolution, but we can work to take some of the heat off the full force of the colonial state on African people and on Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And we won't walk by, we won't stand by and let this happen. We make a commitment that we will do everything we can from the white community to keep the state, the colonizing state, from putting a finger on Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the movement. The party is winning. The impending victory of the African People's Socialist Party as it goes up face to face against the FBI is historic. It is going to push back repression for other colonized people and even for progressive white people, just like the civil rights movement of the 1950s pushed back the McCarthy era. This is going to be profound. So go to Hands Off Uhuru, donate, give everything you can, organize a fundraiser, come to events, create a mass meeting, just build support for Hands Off Uhuru. You can see that at handsoffuhuru.org, Uhuru, and join the winning side, Unity Through Reparations.
Thank you, Penny. And I would echo her, join the winning side. We will be victorious. On that note, what we're gonna do now for the next 30 minutes, we're gonna close. We started a little past 7:30. We're gonna try to have this within 2 hours. So we have approximately about 30 more minutes left. For those who may have a question or a comment, we're gonna open it up now for questions and comments. Keep your question or comment limited to 2 minutes, since that timekeeper is 2 minutes now. And since that we have a number of participants on this webinar. So at this time, I guess people can raise the hand. I need the other moderator who sees the whole board. If you see a hand, please call that person, and then we'll take their question or comment. So at this time, questions and comments from our audience. Everybody don't have to have their hands up at the same time. Any questions or any comments? Okay, we do see a hands up. Lisa Davis.
Uhuru, and I want to say that I appreciate so much people having this Zoom meeting. I think it's so great, and I want to say I was so glad to see so many people who I have worked with in the struggle before involved in this. I must also commend Sister Madelyn Hoffman. If you all don't know her, I know her from New Jersey. We've worked together for a while. We've even had our struggles, but we discuss things. And we have worked together very diligently. In fact, last year when we were having all of these anti-war meetings in Newark, Madelyn Hoffman was involved in organizing them, and we organized around reparations, ending the war, at home, ending the war within the United States and abroad, against African people and other oppressed people. So I just want to commend her for being fearless and taking on these issues. I also just wanted to point out to people that on Saturday, while we were having the Black is Back webinar, one of the church buildings, a vacant church building that I know that the African People's Socialist Party were trying to get, they were in the process of purchasing it, went up in flames. And prior to that, there was an attack on their flag that they have, this beautiful red, black, and green flag in St. Petersburg. And so, the state is determined to be relentless, and we have to not stop them. And I also just want to make people really aware of point number 5 of the goals and aims of COINTELPRO is to make sure that the Black liberation movement remains disconnected from the youth. They said they must develop ways to stop that. And they built up a basketball court with a Black Power logo in the middle of it. And it was around that time when the FBI attacked, although all of these mass shootings can happen, although they organize online and they're very open about it. And they're very connected, many of them, to Azov Battalion, with—
Need to finish.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Brother Jamal Abegas, hopefully I didn't mess up your last name. Brother Jamal.
Thank you, and I just want to salute all of the presenters and the Green Party for holding this event. I wanted to ask, sort of put the question to the Green Party members and organizers here. Will you, all unite and say hands off Uhuru, sign the petition and organize with us in the Defense and the Hands Off Uhuru campaign? Thank you. Uhuru.
Okay, Don, you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, let me, I think Angie has the best, her finger really on what needs to be done. So I'll ask Angie to make sure that we get that. I think she might already have gotten that petition out to Green Party members. Let's get it out again. And also let's get that out to Green Party state chapters. I think there's people from New Jersey here. There's Green Party members from, let's see, from Massachusetts here. If there's any other Green Party members, please send us an email, or please let us know, because we need to get that petition out to other Green parties.
Okay. Our next person with comment or question is Ruby
Gittleson.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saki Baruti. Thank you, for the Green Party for putting on this event. And I wanted to ask a question of Chairman O'Malley. Chairman, I know you have said that this attack is the most severe attack on the Black movement since the 1960s. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and the significance of this attack on the Uhuru movement, on the Black Power Blueprint programs, and why it is so urgent that everybody from all walks of life supports this campaign to carry on the work that the African movement has done since the 50s and 60s, pushing back the anti-democratic attacks, pushing back the whole anti-democratic, mode of America, and why it is so important that everybody supports the Uhuru movement in this period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really important question. Here, what we are faced with is, for the first time since the 1960s, we saw Panther offices and Panther organizations hit throughout this country. On December 4th, 1969, they attacked the Black Panther office in Chicago at 4 o'clock in the morning and murdered Fred Hampton. The week later, they attacked the Los Angeles, Black Panther Party organization. 1969 was also the year that they arrested 21 members of the Black Panther Party that were characterized as the Panther 21 and put them on trial for conspiracy, just like they're charging us with conspiracy. That included, they said, the threat to bomb the flowers in the whatever that place is in New York. That's ridiculous. And so we haven't seen that kind of thing happen since the 1960s, this across states and different offices and things like that of a particular organization. And what they're trying to do with this is to hide the undemocratic nature of the United States government, particularly as it relates to African people, by saying that we're not attacking you because you use the electoral process. We're not attacking you because you use free speech, which the Constitution supposedly guarantees, a freedom of assembly, a freedom of association. We're attacking you because you work for the Russians. And therefore, they don't have to deal with the question, is genocide being committed against African people? Can we run a political campaign that demands reparations and call for Black community control of the police? Do African people have a right to have a different opinion from that of the government in terms of pursuing our own interests? So they don't deal with that question. It's hard for them to deal with that question right now, particularly since they've defined the struggles in the whole world as being revolving between the democracies and autocracies, with the United States being at the helm of the democracies of the world. They cannot explain what's happening to African people. The 14 classrooms filled every year with Black babies who are dying in their first year of life. And I want to just reiterate, I think it's extremely important. I think what we have heard up to now is powerful in terms of its recognition of the anti-democratic and repressive things that we've seen about the United States. But this whole issue must be understood. When we talk the colonial mode of production that was referenced, the reason we're having this discussion in this country that we call America today is because of colonialism and the attack on the indigenous peoples who are living in concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. The reason that the indigenous people, African people, we didn't come here, we have suffered gunpoint from the very inception of the origin of this whole country, where it's appropriate for us to fight for free speech and fight for the right of workers, but you can't find a group of workers that have, you go in history, you won't find labor being oppressed greater in the history of the world than what happened with the slave trade, with the so-called slave trade. In the beginning, we have to understand this. This is the foundation of the whole capitalist system that we're talking about, and Africans and indigenous people and Palestinians and Venezuelans and Cubans and the rest of us constitute this foundation. This entire social system rests upon. That's all we're saying. And so I think this is really powerful, and we have a better chance now than we ever had in the 1960s, because again, in the 60s, it was secret. But now people heard them say, come out of the house with your hands up, this is the FBI, and heard flashbang grenades. And they had the media, they told us this is gonna be in the news. So people know it happened, you know it happened, and we have this opportunity for a magnificent fight back. Thank you.
Chairman, comment on two things. One, article circulating, tying us up, the two of us together. I'll let you explain that. And someone, Lisa had made mention, of course, the fire that took place at the church that the Uhura movement had actually made a down payment on to purchase, if I'm correct.
Well, we had it on the contract. That the church was under contract. It had been empty for a long period of time. It was going to be the Uhura House. It was a place where we were going to move. It was a massive institution, massive building. And on Saturday, while we were having webinars, I get a phone call, the church is on fire. It was an inferno. This was no little fire, it was an inferno. By the way, we're going tomorrow, on Monday, we're going to have a press conference. I'm hoping people can come to that to talk about what happened as a part of the fight back against them. The other thing that Comrade Zaki is mentioning is that some website that seems to have been created exactly for that purpose came out and said that Cori Bush and Zaki Baruti, that I recruited them as agents of Russia, that somehow I have dragged Zaki and Cori Bush, and I haven't heard from Cori Bush since this happened, the most progressive Cori Bush. I haven't heard from her since any of this happened, but this is the stuff that they're putting out. It's spurious, it's lies, and you know, somebody once said, tell a big lie. Don't just tell a lie, tell the big lie, and those are big lies, and the lie that we're working for the Russians is another. Yeah, Zaki.
Okay, on that note, anybody else question or comment?
Bob Saberi has his hand up.
Okay, Bob, I don't. You got, okay.
I've got a quick question. I don't know how, it's for O'Malley. I don't know how pertinent it is, but given the timing of this, do you think it has anything to do with our proxy war in Ukraine?
There's no doubt about that. And in fact, one of the concerns we have is that indictment, we expect any day. We have reasons to believe an indictment will come any day. And we think that part of what they will attempt to do is conflate the attack on us with indictments that's coming out with the Proud Boys and people who were involved in January 6th and things like that. Why it's so important for us to distinguish this and oppose what they're trying to do with the Black Liberation Movement. But somebody commented on our opposition, our support of Russia in this war, and as opposed to we support everybody or oppose everybody. The reason is based on just a real analysis of this whole attack on Russia. This thing has been going on since 2018. In 2018, all the colonial powers on earth, including the United States and Japan, invaded Russia. And they have been trying to isolate and succeeded in isolating Russia and keeping it out from the global economy up until the most recent period. But in 1949, they created NATO. NATO was created explicitly for the purpose of destroying Russia, containing and destroying Russia. So this has been an ongoing thing. It didn't just start on 2014, which was bad enough when they overthrew the legitimate government. The United States did, just like they tried to do, as someone mentioned in Venezuela, Ukraine. They overthrew the legitimate government, most elected government in Ukraine, chased them out of the country and put a pro-US, pro-so-called Western person in power. That's just history. And so what we support is we recognize that this is a proxy war that's been initiated by the United States government and the so-called NATO forces in order to maintain the status quo of colonial domination of the peoples of the world. And that's the basis of our position on that.
Just a quick comment. I put in the chat an article that was written by John Mearsheimer back in, it's not an article, actually, it's a speech that he gave in 2015. It could have been yesterday. But he predicted what's happening today, talking about NATO's incursion on the border of Russia. Why aren't they going after John Mearsheimer? And why aren't you talking with John Mearsheimer?
John Mearsheimer should talk to me. He seems to have access to he talks to you. I didn't know about John Mearsheimer. When I say he talks to you, I mean, he's been able to access you. But I want to talk to anybody. We want as many friends as we can get in pursuit of the struggle. See, we don't have to go through this. All I got to do is capitulate. All I got to do is say, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, we won't do this anymore, and we support the United States, we're good loyal forces. And if you move in that direction, and then you never will have a genuine movement. And to crush dissent is part of what it is all about. I am convinced that the freedom of the people in this country is concentrated in the struggle against colonialism and the struggle of Black people who have advanced this struggle since our being forced into this country. So I don't think you can go wrong supporting this movement, this struggle that we're making against the FBI.
Okay, I see Daniel Stirk. Hopefully I pronounced the last name right. Daniel?
Yes, that's right. I don't know if my mic is working well.
Yes, we can hear you. Speak up a little bit.
All right. I'm kind of learning a lot about this stuff myself, but it's nice to listen to this webinar and everybody speaking, and nice to know there's people out there that aren't too content and just happy enough in this country not to worry about these things. I just appreciate the webinar. I'm not nuanced enough or knowledgeable enough yet to have much of a question about it, but I'm listening. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that compliment. Again, want to emphasize, got a lot of information in the chat. Some of you can go to the chat and there's some powerful comments there. Anyone else with hands up? Anybody else? Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? Oh, we do have a hand up. Molly Wilbur, Cohen. Molly?
Yeah, thank you so much for this incredible webinar. Omali Yeshatela, I had heard about this briefly before, and I am so glad that I attended this webinar. I am from Minnesota, and I have been attending Zoom talks at the East Side Freedom Library on the east side of St. Paul, where St. Paul is in the midst of studying and preparing reparations for Black African Americans. And I just think this is so related. So I don't know if anybody else on this Zoom is from Minnesota, but I think it's very much related to this. And I'm going to talk to staff at East Side Freedom Library to get involved with this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And this webinar will also be uploaded for public consumption at some point in time in the near future. Any other hands? We got a few more minutes left for this webinar. Anyone else, question or comment? All right, I'm going again. Okay, Chris Mann. Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the strategy Chairman is going with is the same strategy that we in the 60s or 70s, the COINTELPRO program, how we knew about it was the Black Panther Party and the Socialist Workers Party sued the government for violation of rights, harassment, spying. So that's how we know, and that, to me, that's a great strategy, and we should support that because that can win people's hearts over a long period of time and expose what's happening.
Okay, thank you. Area code 505-750-2708. You have your hands up. You can make a comment.
Hi, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, yes. I hope I'm audible. This is M. Ward from the Green Party of the Albuquerque metropolitan area. And I have a request that in addition to the recording that the transcript of the chat is made available. Those who called in by phone, can't read the chat, and apparently there's a lot of good information there. So if that could be provided as well, thank you. And thank you very much for this webinar.
Okay, can there be a response to her question as to whether or not the chat can be provided also?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, and I'll just I got your. Give me your name again. I'll send it to you directly.
The 505.
Yeah.
You would like to give your name? You want to send it to you directly?
Or I can.
The request is just the transcript of the chat be provided.
Right. I'll have that, and I put it in the chat for everybody else to see where to get that. You just email me at treasurer@missourigreenparty.org, and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Email me at treasurer@missourigreenparty.org.
Got it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Listen,
You're
Zaki,
welcome.
it's going to be very simple. As soon as Joe gets the recording done, I will get it done. I will have I will have the email address of everybody.
Don, your voice went out.
Okay, can you hear me better?
Yes.
Now,
Okay.
yes.
When we get the recording, I will send out the link for it to everybody. If you want information from the chat, just ask me. And so everybody who is on this, who included an email address in their registration will get a recording. We hope you share that recording with other people, because other people, we're getting people from all over the country participating in this discussion. And so please let other people hear it by sending that out. And also, if you want a transcript of the chat, just send me an email back and I will send that to you. Very few people read the chat because it has this chat will be very long. There'll be a lot of information in it, but I'll send it out to anybody who requests.
Okay, on that note, we'll take one or two more questions. I think this has been a great webinar. Everybody know the historic duty, and that's to support the Uhuru movement. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Any other question or comment? We'll make this the last request. Anybody else? All right, seeing none. Okay, we do. Kim, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to tell people there is a wonderful book that just came out last year called White Malice. And I forget the subtitle, but it's basically how the CIA recolonized Africa. It's an incredible book. I've read it. I'm going to have a review in race class and let's see, race class and corporate power in March. But the book is by a woman named Susan Williams. She's from England. She's done a magnificent job, particularly focusing on the U.S. efforts in the late 50s and 60s, particularly in the Congo. And she points out that President Dwight Eisenhower authorized the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Now, the CIA sent their top bioterrorist to Africa to kill him. And they also had an assassin that was on his trail, and they got beat out by some of the right-wing Congolese under Mobutu. But it's an incredible book. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. If you want to know about Africa in the early 60s, it's an incredible work. White Malice.
Okay, put that in the chat if you will, Kim, in terms of the title. All right, with that said, again, want to thank everybody. This was a great webinar. We had great participation. Want to close out then, and with everybody repeating after me this particular chant. Everybody ready? And everybody say at the same time.
Unmute.
Hands off Uhuru.
Hands off Uhuru.
Hands off Africa.
Hands off Africa.
Everybody stay strong. Victory in our lifetime.
Uhuru.
In our lifetime.
Lifetime.
Interesting.
Peace.
Peace off.